Hey team, just wanted to take a little bit of time with you today to talk about how to explain shifts in an aggregate demand aggregate supply diagram. Um, so we can start off in a couple of different moments here. Let's imagine that we are starting in a recessionary gap. And of course, before we get too into our work here, we might just want to notice that we have our axes labeled correctly. You can see we have aggregate supply, and I really like to put my YFE up here just to leave this area down here a little more clean for my actual Y1s. So I might go ahead and put my Y1 in there. All right. Now, let us imagine that one of the determinants of aggregate demand changes and aggregate demand increases. There are many things that could cause this, but let's just imagine there's an increase in consumer confidence. So consumers are more confident, so they're spending more of their money. So let's shift in here, trying to draw our lines parallel, and just for the sake of this, let me have it be a slightly bigger shift. So that's AD2. So I have two different equilibria points. One is at point A, one is at point B. Sorry about that. Now, what we have here is obviously should be able to talk about a couple of things that are happening. You can see that unemployment is going to fall as our new point is closer to the YFE line. We can see that real GDP is going to grow as we've shifted from Y1 to Y2. And we can see that we've had a very slight increase in the average price level. So we have three things that we can talk about, and we're going to want to mention all of those in our explanation. But I'm going to suggest that you mention those in the second half of your explanation. And first of all, you want to explain why these things have happened. And I think one of the key things to focus on here are workers and wages. So as consumer confidence increases, households increase their consumption, and AD shifts from AD1 over to AD2. Because there's a greater demand for goods in the overall economy, the demand for workers increases. As this demand for workers approaches the full employment line, this places an upwards pressure on wages. And as these wages increase, the overall price level will increase, leading to some inflation. Because of this, we can see that unemployment falls, real GDP increases, and the price level increases. So whenever you shift aggregate demand, I'm really going to suggest that you focus yourself on how does this change in consumer confidence and this increased demand for goods and services affect workers and wages, and let these things drive the rest of your evaluation and the rest of your explanation. So again, let's see here just for a second. We just return here and we give ourselves a different starting point. Let's imagine now that we start in a recessionary gap. And we end up down here. All right. In this point, as we move from A to B, let's start off by looking at our workers and wages. And we're just going to remember that wages tend to be sticky. All right. So Let's say there's been an increase in personal income taxes, which causes this shift from 81 to 82. Right. If this is the case, we can imagine that the decrease in demand for goods and services leads to a decrease in the demand for workers and a decrease in the demand for the components, the factors of production, such as capital and even probably land. And so we'll see a decrease in the average price level from PL1 to PL2. We may even see a slight decrease in average wages, but generally we think the wages are going to remain sticky. So instead of lowering wages, employers are going to reduce the number of workers, which means that unemployment is going to increase in this situation. We've already seen that the price level is going to drop as there is less demand for goods and services and as there's less demand for the factors of production. And we can see that real GDP is going to decrease, although it's slightly a slight decrease. All right, and you would really want to point out that because we started in an inflationary graph, we see a big decrease in the average price level and just a small change in employment and a small change in real GDP. So for most economists, this decrease in aggregate demand is a real net positive, and then you can get into the evaluation. So here we were able to see the ways in which wages drove the increase in the average price level. Here we're able to see how the stickiness of wages leads to unemployment rather than a change in wages, which means that this change in the average price level probably isn't coming from a change in wages, it's coming from a change in other costs of factors of production. The price of raw materials will drop, the price of rent for land might drop, but because wages are sticky, that's why we see the change in unemployment. So those are two scenarios that you can use and that you can focus on when you are when you're coming up with other shifters of aggregate demand. But there are other scenarios that you might want to practice, and then you can check in with your teacher to see if your explanation is correct. But the big thing we're suggesting is to use the word workers and wages in each of your explanations, either to show off that wages are sticky when they go down or to show off that they're flexible when they go up, and therefore they can explain inflation.